A leaked draft report from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change paints the starkest picture yet of the real and accelerating danger caused by humans' use of coal, oil, and gas. William Brangham has the latest.
That's right, Judy. This is a draft report, so it may still change. And it was obtained by the AFP, the Agence France Presse. But even so, the report says the threat from climate change is real, it is here, and it is getting worse. It lays out a myriad of impacts: unlivable heat waves, widespread hunger and drought, rising sea levels that'll force millions from their homes, and the extinction of many species. For a UN agency, the draft language is blunt, saying, quote, "The worst is yet to come, affecting our children's and grandchildren's lives much more than our own." For more on all this, we turn to atmospheric scientist Katharine Hayhoe. She's authored over 100 research papers, written many climate reports, and currently teaches at Texas Tech University. She's also the chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. Professor Hayhoe, very good to have you back on the NewsHour. The UN IPCC keeps saying this is a draft, it may change, but I think it's pretty clear to say this language is incredibly stark for the UN. What do you see as the main points to take away from this draft?
I can't comment specifically on the contents of the draft because it is a confidential document that was provided to governments and experts for review. But what I can say is that the results should be no surprise, because we have known since the 1800s that digging up and burning coal, then, now gas and oil, are producing heat-trapping gases that are wrapping an extra blanket on the planet. In 1965, scientists were sufficiently concerned about the risks of climate change for humans that they formally warned a US president, and that was Lyndon B. Johnson. The IPCC report on the 1.5 degree target that came out in 2018 was absolutely clear. They said every bit of warming matters. Every action matters, every choice matters, and really the time to act is now.
It seems that just from what we understand of the draft language, that this points to very overtly so many other threads of our lives: the food that we eat, the air that we breathe, whether we can walk outside in temperatures that don't burn us. I mean, it seems like it is stretching to every aspect of what it takes to survive on Earth.
That is exactly what is at stake. After the polar bear, we're next. Climate change is not something that needs to be moved up any of our priority lists. The only reason we care about it is because it affects every aspect of our lives, from literally the air we breathe, to the food we eat, to the safety of our homes, to our economy, to the health of our children. I'm part of an organization called Science Moms, where we connect climate change to moms and how we care about our kids. And one of my fellow science moms, Jolene Russell, who's at Arizona, she said today, I had to wake my kids up at 5 a.m. so they could go outside to play because it was too hot and too dangerous for them to play later in the day. How does that not matter to any parent?
I'm always leery of saying, well, this will be a turning point, this heat wave, this drought, this loss of ice. I wonder, why do you think it has taken us so long to appreciate the severity of this situation?
We humans are really good at psychologically distancing ourselves from things that we think will matter in the future, but not now. From how much money we save for retirement, or how much we exercise or don't, or what we eat and what we shouldn't. And it's the same with climate change. It turns out in the US, almost 3/4 of people would say, oh, yes, climate change is real. It will affect future generations. It will affect plants and animals. It will affect people who live in countries far away. But when you say, do you think it will affect you? The number drops precipitously to just over 40%. That gap is our biggest problem. Not the gap of people who say it isn't real, the gap of those of us who say it's real, but we don't think it matters.
Right. I remember you saying before about how the two great myths are, it won't affect me and there's nothing that I can do. So for this report certainly blows away that first myth, as you are saying. This certainly affects everybody that lives on this planet. What about that second issue, though? For someone who is hearing this news and paying attention to this and despairing, rightly so, what do you say to them?
To them, I say, you know what? Every single one of us can make a difference. And here's the amazing thing. It all begins by talking about it, by having a conversation about why it matters, how it connects to what we're already passionate about, whether we're a mom, whether we live in California and we're worried about wildfires, whether we're worried about bigger, stronger hurricanes in the Gulf Coast, whether we're a farmer, whether we're a business owner, whether we care about national security. Talk about why it matters and talk about what we can do to fix it, from individual actions like efficiency, clean energy, electric cars, reducing our meat intake, eating more plants, to much bigger scale. What can our company do? What could our school or university do? How could our place of worship help? How could our city get in on the action? Cities are really where it's at when it comes to climate action. We have to recognize that climate action is not a giant boulder sitting at the very bottom of the hill with only one or two hands trying to push it up an impossibly steep cliff. The boulder is already at the top of the hill. It's already starting to roll down. It's already got millions of hands on it. It just isn't going fast enough.
Another aspect that the UN report, this draft report, touches on is our seeming failure at doing real adaptation to the threats we're already seeing, from rising seas to droughts to agriculture. What would you counsel governmental leaders to be doing on that front, to deal with the threats that are here today, even as we also try to deal with emissions longer term?
Absolutely. We no longer have a choice between cutting our carbon emissions or adapting to climate change. We have to do both because the third alternative is suffering. It's as if we've been smoking a pack of cigarettes a day for years and even decades. You might have some spots on your lungs and impaired breathing, but we don't have emphysema, we don't have lung cancer, and we're not dead yet. So how can we prepare for that future? We have to prepare our water systems, our infrastructure, our buildings, our food systems, even our national security systems. We have to prepare them for the changes that are coming. And we're already doing that. Adaptation is already happening. And along the way, it can save us money, it can clean up our air and our water, and it can provide us with much more healthy and livable cities too.
All right, Professor Katharine Hayhoe, always good to see you. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Winds in the east, mist coming in. Like something is brewing, about to begin. Can't put me finger on what lies in store. But I feel what's to happen. All happened before.
With sweltering temperatures putting lives at risk, the White House could reportedly make a big announcement soon. According to the Washington Post, President Biden could declare a climate emergency as soon as this week. The move would come after two stinging defeats for the White House. Citing inflation concerns, Democratic Senator Joe Manchin said he would block President Biden's climate legislation, which includes tax incentives for wind and solar power and electric vehicles. The other blow, the Supreme Court's decision limiting the EPA's ability to to regulate carbon emissions from power plants. And the extreme temperatures we're seeing through a large portion of the country are putting the issue of climate change front and center. Overseas, historic heat and wildfires are also having a major impact in Europe. The heat wave there is blamed for more than 1,000 deaths in Spain and Portugal. And in the UK, the Health Security Agency announced its first level 4 heat warning, which is the highest possible level. Officials there are calling the brutal temperatures a national emergency. From the U.S. to Europe, we have full coverage this morning with NBC News meteorologist Michelle Grossman and foreign correspondent Claudia Lavanga in Rome. We're going to begin, though, with NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli. So, Mike, we want to start with that Washington Post report that says President Biden is considering declaring a national climate emergency, and it could happen as soon as this week. That's coming from 3 people familiar with the matter who spoke on the condition of anonymity to discuss private deliberations. NBC News has reached out to the White House. We haven't heard back yet. So, Mike, what options would declaring a national climate emergency give the president when it comes to fighting global warming and climate change?
Well, first, Joe, let's just be clear. The president has made it clear as they issued a statement on Friday saying that climate action remains an urgent priority. And as the president put it, if the Senate refuses to act, he will take strong executive action. A White House official just get back to me a moment ago, in fact, Joe, saying that we are still considering all options and no final decision has been made. But what are those options? This official is pointing out that the president has already taken a number of executive actions to try to deal with climate change, including invoking the Defense Production Act just last month to try to boost the solar manufacturing industry. According to a report from the Center for Biological Diversity, which is urging the president to take this more urgent action, he could also consider actions like invoking the Defense Production Act again, suspending offshore drilling, and halting crude oil exports. Now, of course, as the White House is indicating, this is an option that they have been long considering. There was always a certain amount of pessimism about these talks that Senator Schumer was engaged in with Senator Manchin, and so they're ready for this moment, but now they're kind of doing the final vetting of these options.
Mike, one of the big challenges is last month the Supreme Court severely restricted the EPA's authority to regulate carbon emissions. So how is the White House trying to work around that ruling and to avoid further court challenges down the road?
Yeah, this decision last month was seen by a lot of climate activists as a real gut punch. The Obama administration had based so much of its climate policy on using executive authorities, and that was what was struck down by the Supreme Court, specifically the EPA's authority to regulate greenhouse gas emissions under the Clean Air Act. Now, White House officials telling me this morning that they believe that court ruling was actually rather narrow, that this was one narrow ruling on one specific narrow authority. And they believe that there are still authorities within other pieces of legislation that the president can employ at this point, a range of authorities that a range of agencies, even beyond the Environmental Protection Agency, could employ. And so they believe they're on strong legal footing. But when you talk about invoking a climate emergency, I think that's an effort by the White House to give whatever actions the president were to take even more legal authority. We see this in potential action on climate, and we've also been talking about this as a possible public health emergency the administration is considering declaring in the wake of the Supreme Court's decision on abortion. That's where the White House is really in emergency mode on a number of fronts, Joe.
I mean, let's be clear, Mike, any executive order from the president on climate is likely going to end up in court. So Congress is still, ideally for the president, the best way to make a lasting change. But we know Senator Joe Manchin, he's come out against President Biden's climate and tax plan now. So is there any hope at all for more negotiations in the Senate, or is it pretty much the president having to go it alone here?
Joe, the vice president was actually out giving a speech yesterday, speaking to the NAACP. And as it relates to a number of Biden administration priorities, whether it be voting rights, taking action on abortion, or other policies, she said, we need 2 more votes in the Senate. The White House, as I indicated, was always skeptical that Senator Manchin was going to come around. You heard the president say this on Friday. He was asked if Senator Manchin had been negotiating in good faith. He says, I wasn't negotiating with Senator Manchin, so I couldn't speak to it. There was a view, even in Democratic leadership, that Senator Schumer was perhaps a little bit too optimistic that Manchin could be brought on board with a robust effort to revive the Build Back Better agenda. And so now what the president is calling on Congress to do, the Senate specifically, is to take the few options that Senator Manchin is willing to go ahead with and try to pass that. But really, any further action on climate specifically is going to depend on the midterm elections this fall.
All right, Mike Memoli, thanks for kicking us off this hour. We appreciate it.
ever recorded. This blue line shows global carbon emissions between the start of 2019 and the start of 2021. As you can see, there was a big dip when the pandemic hit in January 2020 and much of the world went into lockdown. The dotted line above that demonstrates what emissions were projected to be if the pandemic had not hit. If that drop in emissions had continued every year, the world would be able to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees and help avoid the worst of the climate emergency. But as the world began to open up at the start of 2021, emissions began to rise again.
Hypocrisy. The 2030 Green Agenda. We need to put all the cows in nappies because when they flatulate, the planet dies. If you took 3 million livestock and cow farms and had all of them eat a can of baked beans each, or 100 cans each, and these cows farted and farted for 10,000 years, they still would not do as much damage as this single tire burn in Kuwait did. So that's it. We don't ever talk about putting cows in nappies again, and stop taking away our farms. Our meat is our meat. Do not mess with our meat. Bug protein supplements is not going to cut it. I don't care if you've got your production line already set up. Tough. The farm.
All right, UK. This is what you guys got going on. Your city council passes climate lockdown trial to begin in 2024 because keeping residents just locked down is going to save the planet. Residents will be confined to their local neighborhood and have to ask permission to leave to save the planet. Wow, residents will need to get permission for their council to be able to leave the zone a maximum of 100 days per year. But in order to even gain this, you need to register your car, track your movements, smartphone tracking. I mean, because all of that's going to save the planet, right? I mean, it's not like there's any weather modification patents or anything, or any other devices that could possibly change the weather. I mean, there's nothing like that. But hey, let's get locked up in our houses to save the planet. What do you think?
I wanna shout, I wanna scream till the words dry out. So put it in all of the papers. I'm not afraid they can read.
Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you'll forgive me interrupting all your conversations, but I think you were warned that this might happen. So I just wanted to say, if I may, how much I applaud, for what it's worth, your determination during this G7 summit to create a greener and more prosperous future in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. The global health emergency has shown us what a truly borderless crisis looks like. And of course, we did not fully see COVID coming, yet climate change and biodiversity loss represent a borderless crisis, the solutions to which have been argued about and postponed for far too long. The fight against this terrible pandemic provides, if ever one was needed, a crystal clear example of the scale and sheer speed at which the global community can tackle crises when we combine political will with business ingenuity and public mobilization. Ladies and gentlemen, we are doing it for the pandemic. So, if you don't mind me saying so, we must also do it for the planet. Because to build back better, we need, above all, a truly effective partnership between government and business in order to mobilize finance and innovation and to deliver a just transition for developed and developing economies alike. Only through this sort of government and business coalition can we once again literally put the wind in our sails and win the battle against climate change across all sectors, from agriculture to aviation, from fossil fuels to fashion. While, of course, the scale of the challenge is clearly immense and the window of opportunity to tackle it is closing extremely fast, we, business leaders working through my Sustainable Markets initiative over the past 16 months, have helped us develop the Terra Carta, a roadmap, if you like, offering practical steps on where we need to go and, crucially, how to get there. So, thank you, Your Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, for giving up your precious time for this short meeting. And I can only hope it will be possible to work together towards the G20 and COP26 and to match trillions of dollars with sustainable investments to deliver the target of 1.5 degrees or better still, less than that. Now, I know the Prime Minister would like to say a few words, and then perhaps we could turn to the CEO of the Bank of America, Brian Moynihan, who co-chairs the Sustainable Markets Initiative with me. And as I said, it's nearly finished him off completely in the last 16 months, to offer a brief private sector perspective.
The state's war on the public continues apace. Oxfordshire County Council have approved plans to lock residents into one of 6 zones to save the planet from global warming, or that's how they frame it. The latest stage in the 15-minute city agenda is to place electronic gates on key roads in and out of the city, confining residents to their own neighbourhoods. Under the new scheme, if residents want to leave their zone, then they'll have to get permission from the council, who get to decide who's worthy of freedom and who isn't. Chairman Mao, eat your heart out. Residents will be allowed to leave their zone a maximum of 100 days per year. But in order to gain even this, every resident will have to register their car details, with the council deciding how they're going to move and when via cameras around the city. So if you're a struggling single mother trying to take your kids to school before getting to work, you won't be covered. Tough luck, dear. Take the bus. Or balance yourself and your 3 kids on an e-bike. Oxford City Council, led by a Labour, Lib Dem and Green coalition from hell, are to turn one of the most enlightened locations on earth, home to Oxford University, whose alma mater include John Cleese, Professor Stephen Hawking, Oscar Wilde and Margaret Thatcher, into an outpost of communist China. Councillor Louise Upton, Cabinet Member for Health and Transport at Oxford City Council, has admitted this trial is a nudge to change the way locals travel. Meanwhile, commentator Bernie Spofforth has pointed out that nudge policy is set to be enshrined in law by the House of Lords. Take a look at this. In our hands, behaviour change for climate and environmental goals. Absolutely terrifying. Remember all the nudging during COVID, which saw us locked up, muzzled and unable to bury the dead? Well, there you have it, folks. As predicted by so-called conspiracy theorists who are fast becoming soothsayers and arbiters of truth, COVID lockdowns are to be replaced with climate lockdowns. It's not surprising that this brainchild has come from the political left, because socialism is all about controlling people, controlling their labour, controlling their money and controlling their lives. Forget about no free movement now that we're out of the European Union. We haven't even got free movement on our own shores. It doesn't help, and it's a cruel irony, that the allegedly freedom-loving Conservative Party set this hell train in motion under Boris Johnson, who dares to call himself a libertarian, an egregious breach of the Trades Descriptions Act. By showing totalitarian zealots a bit of leg by setting the precedent of COVID lockdowns, we've given bureaucrats an inch and now they're taking a mile. When Boris Johnson asked us to stay home to save the NHS and promised it was 3 weeks to flatten the curve, that was the moment the genie escaped the lamp. Well, it ain't going back in. Perhaps now people will wake up when they get a fine for driving their car down the wrong street, one which is not in their approved movement zone. Mark my words, this is only going to get worse. The state has become our master, and dare I say it, our abuser. After all, what's the first thing an abuser does? Controls your movements, tracking your every move. Physical freedom is the ultimate hill to die on. If we're not free, life is not worth living. And these days, it's increasingly not worth living in high-tax Britain at all. Probably rather be in Beijing or Pyongyang. At least there, you get the full communist experience. The state has overplayed its hand in the last 2.5 years, creating a miserable, divided and poorer society. We need less government, not more. And that's going to be the next political battleground. In fact, I might buy a sauna, switch to a full carnivore diet and buy a few outdoor heaters just to send the message that I won't be controlled. People aren't stupid. People aren't ignorant, and people are not irresponsible. If you give the public information about energy, for example, or the environment, there's no doubt that most will, by choice, act accordingly. When the horrors of battery-farmed hens emerged in the 80s and 90s, millions of Brits opted for free range, by choice, and the price came down. No one minds recycling, and we all save money by owning energy-efficient appliances, whether it's a dishwasher or a car. But as we saw with autocratic lockdowns and vaccine tyranny, if you make people do things, if it's stick, not carrot, the policy backfires. All it does is radicalise the most compliant of citizens. Well, here's hoping it does. The state needs to back off and get the hell out of our lives. This latest attack on cars is a test case for human liberty, and it's driving me round the bend. What's your view? GB Views at gbnews.uk. Reacting to that is the freedom-loving Lois Perry of Car 26. I hate to say we told you so, right?
I know. Actually, somebody put on Twitter earlier, when I first heard Lois speaking about stuff on GB News and other channels, I thought she was a bit mad. I thought it was a bit
crazy, conspiracy.
A bit crazy, a bit too much.
Tinfoil hat.
Absolutely, all of the above.
Flat earther.
That one, everything. But the tweet said, actually, now everything she's saying is coming true. So it's nice of him to say that. But I actually wish that it wasn't coming true. I wish that I was completely insane and we weren't going down this totalitarian route, which clearly we are. I did a tweet yesterday, which Oxford City Council responded to with this awful 1970s style animated video telling me why it was so fantastic that people would be confined to their zones. Yeah. And it's just absolute insanity. I mean, are we in a 1980s film that's set in the future about a dystopia? Were they telling us what was going to happen? Because we've got districts now. Like all of the films, whether it be Blade Runner, Total Recall, they all had districts, didn't they? And that's what we've got now. Ping, 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 you've left your district. And once there's electric cars, the car will just stop.
Yeah.
It will just stop. There won't be any getting a fine in the post, £80, if you leave your zone more than twice a week.
No.
The car will just stop.
Smart cars, smart motorways, smart roads. It's an assault on human liberty, isn't it? And as I've mentioned, this is a hill to die on. How ironic that this should happen in Oxford, which is, of course, the location of Oxford University, one of the great sort of focal points of Western enlightenment and Western ideas, liberal ideas.
Absolutely, which is why I believe it's been targeted. I mean, it's quite well documented and quite well known that the Chinese Communist Party makes huge donations to top universities and actually pays for whole colleges. Some of them are completely owned by the CCP now. So no, I'm not surprised at all. Actually, they go for the intellectual centres and they go for the power centres. Yeah. So yeah, we're in bed with them now. Jeremy Hunt's married to somebody who gets a cheque every week from the CCP. Welcome to dystopia. Here we are.
A man who spoke admiringly of China's lockdown policies.
Pulling people out of their homes and putting them in re-education centres. No, camps. No, what were they called?
Oh yes, these
quarantines.
Quarantine.
That's right.
It's a polite word for it.
Yeah,
and it is a concern, and it all originates, ironically, from a supposedly freedom-loving Conservative government and Boris Johnson. He's no libertarian. The bottom line is that he talks a good game, but we set a precedent when we shut the country down for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
But the big thing is how big it's getting, how big they're getting rather. Ian was this enormous storm, wider than the entire peninsula of Florida. And of course, there are more people living there than ever, and we will all pitch in to help people recover. But wow, the economic damage is staggering, and we are all ultimately going to get involved in paying for it. So the sooner we acknowledge that we have a problem, the sooner we can get to work on it, everybody. So this kind of hurricane is exactly as predicted by climate models. The world's getting warmer because there's so many people breathing and burning the atmosphere.
It's an assault on human liberty, isn't it? And as I've mentioned, this is a hill to die on. How ironic that this should happen in Oxford, which is, of course, the location of Oxford University, one of the great sort of focal points of Western enlightenment and Western ideas, liberal ideas.
Absolutely, which is why I believe it's been targeted. I mean, it's quite well documented and quite well known that the Chinese Communist Party makes huge donations to top universities, and actually pays for whole colleges. Some of them are completely owned by the CCP now. So no, I'm not surprised at all. Actually, they go for the intellectual centres and they go for the power centres.
Yeah.
So yeah, we're in bed with them now. Jeremy Hunt's married to somebody who gets a cheque every week from the CCP. Welcome to dystopia. Here we are.
A man who spoke admiringly of China's lockdown policies.
Yeah, pulling people out of their homes and putting them in re-education centres. No, sorry. Camps. No, what were they called?
Oh yes, these
quarantines.
Quarantine.
That's right.
It's a polite word for it.
Yeah,
and it is a concern, and it all originates, ironically, from a supposedly freedom-loving Conservative government and Boris Johnson. He's no libertarian. The bottom line is that he talks a good game, but we set a precedent when we shut the country down for 3 weeks.
Yeah.
My sources told me that Number 10 were amazed how compliant the public were at the time.
So was I.
We all somehow we yielded to that principle of 3 weeks to flatten the curve. What was it? Squash the sombrero. But we were had, and that was the point of no return, wasn't it?
It was the point of no return.
It took 3 weeks to destroy Britain, really.
It did, because the thing is, as Brits, we are pushed and we're pushed and we're pushed and we're pushed, and it takes quite a lot for us to snap. But when we do, I think we'll do quite dramatically. But Boris Johnson, he is what people want him to be. He's a libertarian, or he's not. He was pro-Brexit and anti-Brexit. He even wrote 2 leaders, didn't he, for the Telegraph?
He did, yeah.
He is whatever you want him to be.
Yeah, he can't even decide which woman he's in love with, let's be honest.
Well, quite, well, there you go.
Well, maybe he's quietened down since Carrie.
Jesus, here it comes! Global warming! It's coming! Here comes global warming! We did it, listen!
Let's talk about this. This is a crazy story.
Oh boy.
Switzerland may jail people who turn their heat above 66 degrees this winter. Well, good.
Oh?
Those people want to warm their homes.
How dare
What do they think they are? This planet is warm enough. Citizens of Switzerland who dare turn their thermostats above a balmy 19 degrees Celsius or 66 degrees Fahrenheit, perfect temperature if you ask me, over the winter may instead find themselves shivering in a prison cell. The cost of natural gas in Europe has increased more than tenfold. You guys see that in Italy they're doing things by candlelight now at bars and restaurants?
Romantic.
Those who fail to comply with the temperature mandates could receive sanctions between 30 and 3,000 Swiss francs, the equivalent of $31 and $3,090. Federal Department of Finance spokesman Marcus Sporndli. How do you pronounce that?
I hope it's Sporndli. That's great.
Sporndli told the outlet those found intentionally violating the statute would receive up to 3 years in prison. This is the next lockdown, the climate lockdown.
Yeah. and they're going to implement it through smart cities and smart meters. You know, a couple years ago, we saw people screaming, they're installing the smart meters, don't do it, they're going to control everything, and people thought they were crazy. And now when we see stories like this and how people are having their heat turned off because they're you know, turning the heat up too much, it really puts things into a perspective that I think is worth considering, especially with how technology is being more involved in our everyday lives and how central controllers are using it to track, trace, and database.
It's kind of amazing. You know, they say climate change and all that stuff. You got to buy electric cars. And electric cars are really bad for the environment.
The batteries.
I got a Tesla. We went to a supercharger and I plug it in and I'm sitting there and I'm looking at the cost, and it was half the cost of gas. Half. Like, you think it's going to be cheap. Not only did it take 20 minutes to recharge the car, but we ended up spending, I think it was like $20 to like fill up, to like recharge. And I was like, okay, well, that's cheaper than gas, but it's still, I'm pulling up to a gas station, plugging in, spending $20 on my credit card. I was like, what's the advantage here other than I can't go that far and the government can now turn my car off whenever they want?
Yeah, nice.
Keep hearing this conspiracy theory about climate lockdowns, so I'm going to ask Alexa, because you know if I say anything. So here we go. Alexa, what is a climate lockdown?
From NIH.gov. Such lockdowns may be useful as emergency intervention strategies to control air pollution in megacities when ambient air quality deteriorates dangerously.
Okay. Alexa, who is having a climate lockdown?
From JewelryBorder.org. While the mainstream media continue to dismiss the notion of climate lockdowns as conspiracy theory, India is preparing to impose a literal climate lockdown to reduce pollution.
Any questions? I would say another conspiracy theory. That's the dust.
Just say welcome to Oxfordshire Open Prison, because this is what is being delivered. It's akin, I used to work for the prison service, so I know how open prisons work. This is akin to an open prison, these districts and these filters and gates and fines that are being forced onto the people of Oxfordshire without their democratic consent. 1,000 people answered an online survey. That's not even 1% of the population you are forcing this onto. This is a sham, what's going on in here today. And what is this democracy when the people, and this is public question time, may I remind you, public question time, not just speeches, so I have a question, when the people asking questions are shut in a separate room and they're not in here where you face them with accountability. This is freedom of speech. Let me have my freedom of speech when I am I hope the last remnants that we have of democracy in this country, that you will listen to me, because I represent the people of Oxfordshire where I work. I work in Oxfordshire, and there are lots of people out there that are angry that you have not consulted them. They haven't got a clue what's going on, and if you respected democracy, I speak to you, the chair here today, head of the council, if you respected in the room with you and face them and look at them in the eye, and you would allow them to speak. So my question is for the head of transport today, the portfolio head of transport. We met you a couple of weeks ago, Mr. Enright, in Norton, and you categorically stated it. I have it on my phone. Oh yeah, I can play it. You categorically stated that there would not be 6 districts introduced. Yeah. You can switch the microphone.
So this video was removed by TikTok yesterday, and I thought I'd give it one last try. So over the next few years, what you're going to hear talk of climate lockdowns. Okay, so we've already got used to the idea of lockdowns. This is going to be to save the planet under the guise of climate change, because we know how important that is, right guys? And they're going to propose this once a week and going to tell everyone to do absolutely nothing to save the planet. And it's going to be on a Sunday. Now, there's a reason that it's going to be on a Sunday, and there's a reason why the Pope and the Vatican are pushing for that specific day. Now, I'm not religious in the slightest, but they do seem to like to have a little bit of a dig at Christianity. And if you actually look at the 10 Commandments, it says here, remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. Now, according to Christianity, the true Sabbath day is a Saturday, not a Sunday. So in their eyes, they not only get us to lock down, but they also get us to globally commit a sin altogether.
They are placing electronic gates on key roads to confine people to their own neighborhoods to help save the planet.
You can't stay on the green. Can you all go home? Can you all go home, please? It's not a holiday. It's a lockdown, which means you don't just come in and sunbathe. Can you please just leave? The government has a lockdown in force. Can you please get off the green, go home?
Curfew is now in effect. All unauthorized citizens must stay indoors.
Tensions rise as we enter the 213th week of lockdown.
A grim new reality emerges.
You must not attempt to leave your home, or you will be shot on sight.
This is my message to you.
I know you're in there.
I can't help you. What you're talking about is illegal.
Last night I dreamt about how things were.
Of every enemy of the state!
And then I woke up here.